I'll kick off by welcoming everyone and thanking everyone for joining our panel discussion addressing what we think is a very relevant topic of modernisation around virtual machines and containers and the benefits of running IBM Cloud Paks on Red Hat OpenShift. For those of you that don't know me, and I can see most of the people on the screen probably do, but my name's Shane Charleston. I'm one of the category leaders at TechData, looking after specifically IBM hardware, or I should say software, but I'm also very involved in the Red Hat side of the business as well. And I'll be facilitating this panel discussion today. So I'd like to thank you all very much for joining us. I think everyone will be on mute throughout the discussion. However, if you have any questions, please feel free to jump in via the chat or just take yourself off mute and ask questions. We're very much hoping today will be an interactive conversation, so please don't be shy and jump in if anything comes to mind. So without any further ado, I'll get started by introducing, or at least asking our panel members to introduce themselves. And I see Nikki Chu from IBM is up in my top right-hand corner, so I'll dob Nikki in and he can go first.
Thanks, Shane. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm responsible for the part of business which we call hybrid cloud, in particular what we call application management integration. Set of technologies for IBM for Asia Pacific. Essentially, it's all the technologies that one would require to build, integrate, deploy, and manage all the applications in this multi-hybrid cloud world.
Thank you, Nikki. Great to have you. Mark from Red Hat.
Red Hat, as you can see virtually. Mark Hillenbrand. I've been with Red Hat about 1.5 years. Prior to that, I was involved in digital services, mobile apps, middlewares, stuff like that. So I have a bit of an AWS pedigree. I've been in video games, financial services, but I'm happy to be with you all here today. Right now, my job as a developer advocate with Red Hat is mostly focused around OpenShift, which is sort of our Kubernetes kind of distribution, if you will, but it's very focused around DevOps and great for developers, which is why I'm here. So thanks for having me on the panel.
Thanks for being here, Mark. Greatly appreciated. And last but certainly not least, we have Taylor Holloway from, pardon me, from Advent One.
Hi, my name's Taylor from, as Shane said, from Advent One. I primarily work with our clients to help them modernize and adopt technology that helps their businesses. We're a premier IBM partner, a platinum IBM partner and an advanced Red Hat business partner, which I suppose puts us in a unique position as we have this discussion today around IBM Cloud Paks and Red Hat OpenShift.
Thank you, Taylor. Thank you, Nikki, and thank you, Mark. It's great to have you all, and appreciate everybody's time. So, look, I'll set the scene. We all know a little bit about virtual machines, but I'll throw to Nikki first. Can you sort of tell us a little bit about containers and the trends that you're actually seeing?
So, well, containers, I guess I would say, burst onto the scene a couple of years ago, right? I mean, we all know virtual machines. It's been around for a long time. However, with the advent and the growth of the cloud, the use of cloud, and that move towards digital transformation, everyone moving towards offering digital services, especially, I guess, over the last couple of months, we've seen that given the current health and economic climate, a lot of people are, what was once a nice to have, a digital presence, has become an essential, a must have, right? So to be able to scale the kind of digital offerings that any organization has to bring to market to interact with the ecosystem, whether they're clients or business partners, a lot of the technologies that people are using, they realize that they need to really scale very quickly and deploy very quickly to offer new products and services. So container technology came into place. It has kind of grown explosively over the last couple of years, and also even more so in the last couple of months, right? So the reason why containers, it allows you to use a lot less resources, allows you to scale a lot quicker, deploy workloads a lot faster than you would in a virtual machine environment.
Okay, thank you, Nikki. That's great. Now, Taylor or Mark, is there anything that you wanted to add there before we sort of keep moving things along?
Sure. The one thing I would add is kind of leads into some other stuff that we might be talking about, is that I came from more of a Windows kind of background. And I think some of this container revolution kind of happened on the Java side of the world, almost like the upside down as far as Windows developers are concerned. But now containers are coming into Windows land, and they're starting to embrace it in the same ways that Nikki was talking about for industries that have worked in Java before, because they allow you to make better and more efficient use of your compute resources, as well as having benefits to developers in terms of they're like VMs that you can spin up much faster, and they're already packaged with everything you need to run your app. So there are many reasons why, not just consumption reasons, but also development reasons why containers are getting very popular.
Thanks, Mark. Nikki, what about, I suppose, industry verticals? Do you see any specific industry verticals adopting this at a faster rate, or and if so, sort of talk about if you could share a little bit about workloads and how they're moving to containers?
So one of the stories I heard, I'm not sure how true that is, and to those who know the truth, they can keep me honest here, right? One of the true deployments, really advantages that we see in containers was actually a game called Pokemon Go. I'm not sure how many of you have come across that, right? And that's where I guess Kubernetes really show, or containers and Kubernetes really, came to the forefront to show how fast it can scale. Because one of the key things about digital applications, right? There's a lot of elasticity in terms of the demand on the workload, right? So one moment you get a lot of people logging in, you have one of those 11/11 sales or Black Friday sales. You get a lot of people logging in and placing orders. NVIDIA just launched their new graphics cards, for example. It's totally sold out, right, within hours, right? So that's where you get very elastic workloads, and that's where any organization who is addressing very elastic workloads, that's where containers kind of play very much to their advantage, and that's where it brings a lot of value to them. So we're starting to see, traditionally has been a lot of the e-commerce players, the born in the cloud companies that adopting containers, and were the kind of the first adopters. And now we're starting to see financial services take off. And on the back of that, logistics, and of course, government services, right? Public sector as well. We're starting to see a lot of that because, claims, financial claims for government injections, whether it's for any of those financial aid as well. We start to see a lot of those, utilizing a lot of the digital services from the public sector as well. So this is some of the initial adoption that we're starting to see in the various industries. I'm not sure, Mark, you have anything to add on that as well?
It's interesting you talked about Pokemon Go. I can remember, I think it was 2016 where my kids were running around trying to collect Pidgeys and all these kind of random things. And yeah, it sort of was Kubernetes kind of coming of age because it showed that it could handle all the load in an elastic way. Coming from a Windows world, we thought the only way to do elastic kind of elasticity like that was to use a public cloud provider like AWS or Azure or something like this. But what Kubernetes kind of showed is that you don't necessarily need to just rely on those services. These are things that you could do yourself, and you could choose the perfect cloud for your needs or do it on premise. So Kubernetes kind of reimagined what was possible, starting from containers and then leading into Kubernetes. And I'm sure we'll be talking about that more. So, but thank you for reminding me of Pidgeys and training gyms. And oh my God, we used to go on such walks just to collect these things.
So I never had to go through any of that. Okay, so we're actually going to sort of launch a poll into the audience, and Danny from Advent One is going to actually put that out there. But while we sort of look at that, I suppose it sort of comes down to, is anybody on the call actually running IBM software? And sort of, if so, what are you running? So you should see it pop up on your screen.
All right, we've almost got a 50-50 split, Shane. 42% say yes, 58% are not running IBM software. So I'll end this one.
And are we looking to sort of have any adoption of microservices in the future?
Well, just, sorry, whoop. All right. Still got some votes coming in. I'll just leave it up there for a couple more moments. The majority is saying yes.
That's great. So who amongst, I suppose the next part of that is for those that are running IBM software, who's actually using OpenShift at the moment? Or is there some Kubernetes being run currently as well?
Just a few more moments, Shane.
No problems.
Great. And just the final question, I was a bit behind you there. Are you running Kubernetes in production currently? Majority is saying no, just for the record.
Well, thank you. Hang on.
Alrighty, I'll end that one there. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Danny. Okay, so I'll come back to the panel now, and thanks for everyone for answering the questions. So Taylor, there is a level of complexity around containers, or at least there's a perception of complexity around containers. How hard is it for an operations team to basically run containers in production?
Well, when we talk about running containers, it's actually very easy to set up a Docker instance on your laptop and get it up and running, or to install a couple of containers is very easy. The challenge becomes, to your point of running them in production, it gets hard and complex when you have a lot of them. So when you need to worry about networking, worry about storage, high availability, and so on, things can become very difficult. What you can then do is obviously look at adopting something like Kubernetes, which is going to allow you to integrate your storage networking and to be able to create a cluster where you can schedule your containers, which then brings its own level of complexity around how do I make sure the cluster's running well, worrying about upgrades, how do I orchestrate a deployment into my cluster, and this type of thing. But then again, the experience of using it on the face of it is very easy, very simple to use. There's a lot of complexity under the covers that obviously gets abstracted away, which is why obviously we'll talk about OpenShift and so on, and how does that help along the way. If Mark or Nikki wanted to sort of make some comments there.
One thing I'd say about containers is, from a developer point of view, when I first came up against them, I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to learn all this kind of crazy stuff. And the light bulb moment for me was using, some of you guys developers out there use this open source project called Visual Studio Code, which is sort of a free open source version of Visual Studio. And you can run a development environment on a container. And the first time I kind of pulled down some open source and it had that container ready to go so that I could edit and run, say it was Java, because I'm in Windows world, and I could do that inside a container and do that almost instantly, I was sold. I was like, this is amazing. Everybody needs to use containers. Until that container needs to speak to 2 other containers, and they all need to run at the same time. And then you imagine doing that in production. How do I scale them up or down? What happens when a container fails? That's where the Kubernetes kind of specter kind of comes into the picture a bit, because the containers, they're awesome. They're generally simple, like Taylor's saying, but it's orchestrating them, as Taylor mentioned, that becomes challenging before too long.
Especially at scale, I guess, to add to that, right? Especially at scale, once you get hundreds of containers running, and especially in those very elastic environments where, as we say, suddenly at, after office hours, 5 p.m., suddenly everyone wants to go online and buy something, toilet paper, for example, right? And you get, your system will start to say, hey, there's more demand, I'm going to spin up more containers, and how do I cope with that? And the coping availability, all the resources that you require, whether you need to spin up more, more compute resources to cope with all of that. So that's where, Kubernetes kind of takes care of that. And then as an organization, especially around financial services and public sector, and all these people start utilizing all of this, then they start to think about, what about security? What about governance? What about access? How do we control that? How do we control that uniformly across all the deployments, whether I deploy it on AWS or Azure or Google, for example, right? How do I uniformly apply all of those policies across, or whether it's on-prem as well?
Interesting. So I'll throw this out to the group because you hear a lot of things about being Kubernetes being very, very easy to run. So I'll ask firstly, is it as easy to run as it sounds? I've read articles that suggest that it can be quite complex. So that, complex to run, complex to deploy. So does it really solve the problems, or are we just adding another layer of complexity?
Just to quickly jump in on that, what I might say is that both can be true, in the same way that an operating system can be, something like a Mac can be kind of friendly to interact with, but it hides a huge amount of complexity behind it about how this machine is actually working and what the things it's doing that you don't even need to think about because the operating system is. But like a Mac, if you've ever had a Mac that breaks for some reason, then a lot of people, myself included at times, you're at sea because it was hiding all that complexity. And suddenly when you see some of that complexity come to the fore, when something goes wrong, then you're at sea. And I think that metaphor kind of plays out with Kubernetes, that both are true. It's very easy. When it works, it's amazing. It's solving all these problems we talked about with containers on their own. But when something goes wrong, which invariably things go wrong, or your organization's idiosyncratic, or security or governance, like Nikki was talking about, then it can start to become complex very quickly. Yeah, Nikki, did you have more to say?
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, it is not, it is sophisticated technology, right? I mean, it is sophisticated technology in the first place, and it's always complex underneath it all. So what, what a lot of organizations like ourselves are trying to do is to make it easier for our users, and developers to actually take advantage of such complexity. And that's where, we work together, and then we see that in Red Hat as well. That's why, we decided to acquire Red Hat as well, because they're working in the same direction as we are. We had something called ICP in the past, right? Which also was a Kubernetes orchestration platform. We see this great technology, a great, value proposition to all the people who are developing microservices-based applications and deploying it. And there's a lot of synergy between us and Red Hat, and we came together and say, hey, Red Hat, we looked at the container management platform and say OpenShift is the way to go. And that's basically that user interface that Mark was talking about, that, that GUI that you see in front of a Mac hiding behind the complexity of Mac OS. So this is like that interface that helps you to, manage and orchestrate and do all that complex stuff easily, much more easily than you would do it yourself on your own.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks, Nikki. So OpenShift, Mark, can you give us the elevator pitch?
Yeah, I think I can. I think the thing with OpenShift is, think about it like we were just talking about operating systems, right? Some people look at it, they look at Kubernetes, like they read about it in a magazine, like, I can do that. Like a recipe, you look at a cake, and you're like, I can bake that, that's easy. And then you get in and you try and bake that cake, because anyone could buy flour and eggs and what have you. And then you realize, like, it turns out like one of those cake wrecks, like something goes wrong, you put in too much flour, you didn't whip it enough. My daughter is really into baking. So you can see what can go wrong just with simple things that you didn't think matter. Others look at the cake and they think, oh, that's for suckers. I'm going to totally outsource that stuff. And I'm going to make it 100% something that goes, I'm going to outsource it to, say, some proprietary distribution of Kubernetes, like something like, maybe AKS, EKS. And those use cases can make sense, but what happens then is that you've lost control of sort of that infrastructure and some of the flexibility that you thought you were getting with Kubernetes. Now you can become locked in. OpenShift kind of tries to do both. And it says, not the lock-in, but more say, you can get some of the benefits of building the cake yourself, baking a cake yourself, and some of the benefits of having somebody else manage it by walking this middle line. Like, what if you had like a pastry chef to help you as you went. So yes, your Kubernetes, you have access to it, you can see the code, you can mess around with it, but you have somebody supporting you, right? And you can run it on something like IBM Cloud, where now some of the management is there for you, but you're working with something that fundamentally is Kubernetes and is an open kind of way of managing your Kubernetes cluster and not getting sucked into the proprietary kind of lock-in, which we might talk about more later. OpenShift also skews well with developers, which is another reason why I'm here, but we'll get into that maybe later on.
Thank you. You've just reminded me of the Dr. John Hewson trying to explain the GST by baking a cake. Cost him an election. Where can I run OpenShift, Mark?
Where can't you run OpenShift?
Okay, let's have it.
The point of OpenShift, because it's trying to give you that kind of freedom, that you don't have to be locked into any given vendor. You can run it on premises, you can run it in a public cloud. There are a number of installers that make that easy, some of which Taylor may talk about how easy it is to stand up a cluster, but that is the point. The ultimate, one of the big visions behind OpenShift is, what if all your cloud computing were mediated by a single pane of glass, where clusters could be anywhere on premise, on the edge, in the cloud, and they're all something that your engineers and your operations team understand, which is OpenShift, Kubernetes, but supported by Red Hat and IBM. That is sort of the vision. You can take back control of that platform without all the overheads of building your own platform, if that makes sense. That's sort of what we're hoping to accomplish with OpenShift.
Thank you. I think it makes sense. It makes more sense to me now. Can you sort of share a little bit about vendor lock-in, either by OpenShift or cloud hyperscale vendor?
Yeah, the vendor lock-in there's a lot of different things that people mean when they talk about vendor lock-in. Probably the majority talk about, like if I put something and I use a native, say, AWS service like Lambda, and then suddenly I decide, I don't want to use Lambda anymore, or worse, like databases that are, Aurora or something like this, and I decide, now I want to move that to somebody else. That's going to take time and effort because I'm locked. It doesn't exist except inside that proprietary environment. And that's where people get worried, those who may have compliance reasons to be worried or business reasons to be worried. Like, what if Amazon gets into the grocery business? Oops, that happened. Like, what if they want to take their stuff off that platform, move it somewhere else? It's not easy to do so. That's one type of lock-in that Kubernetes, open source, is trying to avoid. It's saying this is something that you can see it, you can change it, you're not beholden to somebody else to run it. And that's some of the benefit that Red Hat is trying to give you. Now, the problem is, if you go too far, you're baking a cake yourself, right? In that whole metaphor. And Red Hat's saying, no, we'll support you with that. You can still see all the dials, you can still turn all the knobs, but we'll tell you, wait a minute, don't overbeat those eggs, or oops, you can't just take sugar out of the recipe. I know you don't think you need it, but this is important. That's what we're trying to do, is kind of, again, take back control of your infrastructure without being burdened by it, of your platform, your container platform. That's sort of what we're trying to do. So you can move, if you imagine you had an OpenShift cluster running in AWS, and then you decided, you know what, I'd be better off moving this into IBM Cloud. That becomes a trivial exercise, because the mediation, if you know how to use OpenShift, Kubernetes, you can easily migrate from one to the other. And that's sort of the freedom that OpenShift is hoping to give you, real runtime ability to change between clouds. Perhaps even in production, we have some use cases where people are running clusters in 2 different clouds and running workloads spread to those 2 clusters. So again, that's where things are headed in the industry. I wonder if Nikki agrees.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, lock-in is something that's very close to heart for IBM, right? I mean, we were once accused in our mainframe days, right, that we were the master of lock-in. And now, if you look at it, I mean, the cloud, any of those public hyperscalers, there are proprietary clouds. They are almost like mainframes, right? You go in there, there's a lot of proprietary databases, as you mentioned, proprietary middleware services, and so on. And IBM has taken a different tack since probably about 20 years ago with Java, right? What the premise of Java was, you build once and you deploy anywhere. right? And that was for Java workloads. And now in the new modern, cloud native way, you want to be able to build it once and deploy anywhere as well, independent of which public cloud provider, or even if you want to deploy in-house, you want to put it back in-house. So that's what OpenShift brings to the table, to be able to help you to be able to deploy it once, build it once and deploy it, whether on-premise or in AWS or Google or Azure or IBM for whichever cloud that matters, right? And especially if you're multinational, some of those cloud providers may not have a local instance in those countries that you're operating in, and you may want to say, hey, I want to deploy on a public cloud provider that has a local instance in that country for a variety of different reasons, right? Data residency being one of those. And we had examples where there were, AWS was really big in Korea, and we had clients who were deploying everything on AWS. And again, back to the gaming world, right? There was a particular company in Korea that developed a game called PUBG, and it was launched, and it crashed the entire AWS instance or node within the country, and all the other businesses that's running on AWS kind of went down overnight. We had a lot of clients coming to us and say they want to put workloads on IBM Cloud primarily because they want to have a multi-cloud strategy now, because they don't just want to rely on one person, right? And so you're starting to see a lot of clients starting to look at multi-cloud deployments, and that's where a platform like OpenShift is going to help you, right? To be able to again build once and deploy on any cloud of your choice, be it on-premise, AWS, IBM, it doesn't really matter, Google, Azure, and so on.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so you mentioned deployment. I suppose I'm interested in understanding, is deployment of OpenShift actually a relatively simple thing, or what are we talking about in terms of how do we deploy?
I'm happy to take a stab at this, but Taylor, I know you probably have even more experience than I do in this. If you want the first crack at it.
Sure. Look, OpenShift has I can do a short demonstration to step through this. It's very easy to deploy, where cloud providers, IBM's an example, have a OpenShift deployer as part of their service catalog. If you want to deploy OpenShift on bare metal, IBM Power, IBM Mainframe, any of the cloud providers, VMware, Rev, it's pretty broad where the OpenShift installer will help you deploy. You basically define what the cluster deployment will look like in a file, run the installer, go grab a coffee and come back and you're up and running. So Mark, you may want to add to that, which I've sort of glossed over it pretty quickly, but it is very straightforward, particularly compared to what it used to be.
Yeah, it's one of the things that the current version of OpenShift is OpenShift 4. And in OpenShift 4, they're very much trying to make it an experience that is seamless. They don't want that barrier to entry to be overly high. So for simple installations, maybe for hobbyists or people who are trying to get used to OpenShift, yes, there is this OpenShift installer that can target many different public clouds as well as VMware, as you're bringing up, even IBM mainframes, and allows you to, it just stands up a default vanilla configuration of a cluster. There are more advanced ways that might take expertise, like Red Hat or IBM expertise to stand up, but a lot of things that Taylor's talking about for the 80% case, most people can use, hey, here's the tried and true best example, best reference architecture, all of the things being equal for standing up an OpenShift cluster, Kubernetes cluster. So yeah, you can pretty much deploy it anywhere. And once it's deployed anywhere, now, like what Nikki was talking about in the multi-cloud thing, you can actually imagine deploying workloads to two different clusters that can be in completely different locations. Could be disaster recovery scenarios or just CDN type scenarios, or there are a lot of use cases that open up once you have that platform set. So I don't know, Nikki, if you want to add to that when we're talking about deployment.
Absolutely. I think from a deployment standpoint as well, I guess we've made it very easy. And in addition to that, if we do have clients who say, hey, I'm not ready to adopt public cloud infrastructure, because my data is sensitive, I want to stand it up within my data center. So with that, we do have what we call a cloud in the box as well, that gives you the ability to do a single click deployment as well, as Mark has mentioned, where it will fit 80% of your requirements, and a single click deploy OpenShift very, very quickly, stand up the environment, and you can start, building applications and deploying it. So we do have a cloud in the box with that as well, that facility. And we're trying daily, on a daily basis, to make it easier for people to use OpenShift, like how Java is pervasive today. And I think Taylor's going to show us how easy it is.
Yeah, what's that?
Yeah, I'll just share my screen and see if we can
Bake that cake that Mark talked about.
Yeah, that's
yeah,
right.
I think I wouldn't try and extend that analogy. I might be drawing a pretty long bow, but I'm logged into the IBM Cloud console, and we can just click over here and click on OpenShift and Overview, and we can go and create a new OpenShift cluster. We pick the version of OpenShift that we like. So there's 3.11, an older version that's available, 4.3 and 4.4. So let's go with 4.4. We'll go with the latest one available. For my entitlement, if I have an IBM Cloud Pak, I can use my OpenShift entitlement that comes with my Cloud Pak. There's some caveats obviously around that this cluster is for running Cloud Paks. We can say we're going to run it in Asia Pacific. We'll go multi-zone. We'll run it out of Sydney. It then obviously want to say apply my Cloud Pak license, and that's it. We'll go and create our cluster, and that is hopefully going to create it takes a minute or so to go through, and this will stand up an OpenShift cluster with across 3 availability zones in the IBM Cloud, with a worker sitting in each. Each worker is going to have 4 vCPUs and 16 gig of memory. My internet's not the fastest, but we'll get there, and it'll kick off any minute now. So I'll, I suppose, embrace an awkward silence while we're waiting for this to finish. There we go. So that will go and kick off, and it takes around half an hour for this to complete. So if I go back to our clusters page, we'll see one I prepared earlier, where this cluster is ready to go. I can, from here, launch the OpenShift web console, and it helps you in terms of authentication and stuff. It's all sort of hooked up to the IBM Cloud. So I can go and log into the OpenShift interface here. And if I want to use the command line to manage my cluster, I can very easily click on Actions. I want to connect to the CLI. I can go and grab a token, and that will allow me to connect. So I'll just quickly demonstrate that once we get there. So all of the identity management in this particular cloud environment is all set up. So I want to grab a token and log in. And we're logged into our, so we can see we've got 3 nodes in our cluster there. Beyond that, once you're in, we can look through, and there's operators. So how do I consume content which may be from the upstream or that is certified? And you can be able to filter on whether it's from Red Hat, whether it's a certified provider, or whether it's from the community. Networking, storage, monitoring, all these things are out of the box. They're ready to go. So if I want to look at some dashboards, for instance, all of this is already set up straight out of the box. So this is one that is deployed in the IBM Cloud. The other environment we could look at is one that is in a broom cupboard in level 14 in our office. And you can see on this one, we get exactly the same thing. This is on a slightly later version, and it's also in a very unhappy state. You'll notice that all of our pods are running, but what I noticed earlier to see if our lab was still alive is that one of the underlying hypervisor hosts in our lab either is busted or someone has turned it off. And you notice that we've lost half the nodes in our cluster, yet everything is still alive. So in terms of high availability and everything continuing to work, I didn't even notice until I thought I'd click around and see why my cluster was unhappy, and it's lost half its nodes, yet everything's working. The other thing that I think Mark might touch on in a moment is OpenShift pipelines. So from a developer experience to get all your CI/CD integration, that comes straight out of the box. Another interesting thing that seems to be more emerging is the ability to use container native virtualization, or CNV. So I can not only run containers on OpenShift, I can actually run virtual machines on OpenShift as well. Which means if you have, you know, an application that needs a virtual machine, or a component of it needs a virtual machine, you can run that in here too. So hopefully, sort of by clicking around, this gives you a sort of a quick view of what's available. And obviously, I can sort of continue chatting with Mark, Shane, and Nikki. And if there's anything anyone would like to see, please feel free to mention it in the chat.
I might just jump in, just since you're showing this, like, and riff on something that Nikki was saying about it being sort of a cloud in a box. I think one of the things that OpenShift brings, besides this sort of level of abstraction across broom cupboard infrastructure versus IBM cloud infrastructure, is that with operators, particularly in pipelines, it becomes almost like, if you will, a public cloud in a box. It's just a public cloud of your own making. And it has in it everything you need to actually develop and self-service, right? So operators, like Taylor was showing you just before, there are operators for creating things that developers hate to manage, but love to use, like Kafka clusters. Some of you probably have heard about Kafka at some point, or databases, as we brought up before. But these are all databases that can run and can be managed automatically by way of this technology that is not unique to OpenShift, but OpenShift makes it a first-class citizen, this thing called operators, which gives developers that self-service. And what Taylor's showing you here is a developers only kind of perspective, a view through Kubernetes, through OpenShift, of what developers care about. Did you want to talk about this anymore, Taylor? Just since you went there?
I figured it was lining up what you were talking about, and there is a catalog view where so there's two views in OpenShift. There's administrator, which I was in earlier, and a developer view where I don't care about networking, storage, and nodes and all of that stuff. I just want to go and, from a service catalog, deploy an application. There's obviously some IBM ones from IBM Operator I've got installed, but it could be databases, middleware, whatever it is that you want to deploy. So it's quite simple. But I'll stop my share now and hand back to Shane, unless there's anything anyone else would like to see, and hopefully that doesn't break my demo, even though I'm missing half the nodes in one of our clusters.
No, thanks, Taylor. It's good to be able to see a visual representation of what it actually looks like, and clearly it's a lot simpler than I had given credit to it. So thanks again. So Nikki, I'll throw back to you. I suppose, what's IBM doing? Perhaps you could sort of help share a little bit about what IBM's doing to help clients in the world of Kubernetes. And maybe how does the Red Hat acquisition sort of tie in?
Sure, absolutely. I guess one of the key things about the Kubernetes and containers and so on, we see that as a tremendous value proposition for a lot of our clients, and to help our clients go on that journey. And it is a journey, right? You don't say, I'm going to go adopt Kubernetes overnight, and you got to take that step and say, what are the workloads, what are the applications that are going to start moving to this, or I might test it with a new application or a new digital service that we want to start to offer, right? So what we're trying to do is that you've got a great Kubernetes management platform that is open, that allows you to run it in any environment, any infrastructure. But then we start to look at it from an application development standpoint of view. What do we do to help the application developer? So we created what we call and organizations as well, from application development to deployment, to integration, to deployment, and to management, right? Because we always look at it end to end, right? So from an application development perspective, we say, hey, let's put together all the different components that you require to build an application, whether it's a cloud native deployment, or whether you want to modernize an existing Java-based application and move it into microservices. So we took all those components and also your CI/CD framework that you might have in place, or you may not have a CI/CD framework. So then we have, collated a whole bunch of CI/CD frameworks and say that is built for the Kubernetes world. And we built something what we call a Cloud Pak, right? So we built altogether a number of different Cloud Paks. So the first one is around application development, which we call Cloud Pak for applications. So within it is powered by OpenShift at the foundation level, and we have the CI/CD framework, the Tekton. We've got the Red Hat runtimes. We have our WebSphere application server. We have the WebSphere Liberty, which is good for running microservices apps. We support Node.js and a whole bunch of other stuff. We have a mobile foundation framework as well on top of that. And then we have tools to help you to modernize, right? Whether it's to modernize Java applications, which is something called Transformation Advisor that helps you with that journey, as well as a tool that translates monolithic applications to microservices, which we call mono to micro, right? So that's another. So that's basically all the different tool sets, and we put it together and we say this is Cloud Pak for applications, everything that you need to develop a modernized microservice-based application. And moving on to that, I always say no app is an island, right? So no application really stands alone. Every application needs to communicate to other applications. So then that comes, then you talk about integration. How do I integrate this application to the rest of the other applications? Of course, the natural way is to use APIs. And some people would say APIs would be the only way that you need to integrate other applications, but we realize it's not, because you need to ingest real-time events for event-driven applications like Kafka streams, right? You need to have integrate with guaranteed messaging for asynchronous messaging. So your traditional asynchronous messaging like MQ is still going to be used, right? Or AMQ and so on. So we took all these different methods of integration, including application integration with traditional applications like SAP, Salesforce, ServiceNow, and so on, and put it all together and call it Cloud Pak for integration. So we took the trouble of integrating all the integration patterns into one integrated, lack of a better word, integrated offering that is built on top of OpenShift to help our clients integrate their applications. And after you integrate it, you then think, how am I going to deploy it? So if you're going to deploy it in the public cloud, you could use it on any public cloud, or you could deploy it on an appliance, which we created a cloud in the box, which we call Cloud Pak Systems. So within Cloud Pak Systems itself, it has, it runs on Power or Intel. So it's your choice, right? And yeah, we do have Intel boxes again, right? So we're back into that, but it is a cloud in the box that has OpenShift pre-installed, single-click install, and all the different Cloud Paks that you have. You could do single-click installs, which we created patterns, right? So you can define your own pattern engine. There's a pattern engine within it. You can define your own patterns so that you can deploy all your workloads and your applications really, really quickly. And after deployment, we always say if you can't manage it, you can control it, right? So we have the management part of it. So together with CloudForms and Ansible as part of that solution, we created something called Cloud Pak for multi-cloud management. So it allows you to then manage different workloads on different clouds, whether it's AWS, Azure, Google, IBM, or in a private environment, and whether it's running in containers in Kubernetes or it's running in virtual machines. So it doesn't discriminate. So we allow you to manage that hybrid multi-cloud environment within a single pane of glass, which we call multi-cloud management. So that's what we did as IBM, and we looked at it from an end-to-end journey, from the time you build, integrate, deploy, to managing it. And the management part of it is always critical, because then you need to ensure that all your different workloads running in virtual machines and Kubernetes and OpenShift have to have the same policies and governance all across it. So with that, we allow you to do that within a single pane of glass. So that's what we're doing with Cloud Paks to simplify that journey for our clients.
That's terrific, and you've actually I now no longer need to ask you my last question about explaining Cloud Paks a little bit. So no, I appreciate that. Look, that's about all I've got. So I'd like to thank Nikki and Taylor and Mark for sharing their time with us and being able to expand a little bit about about what we've been talking about today. It's been terrific, and I've certainly taken a little bit away from it. Now, any questions from the audience? Feel free to either jump in verbally or via the chat. So I can see one from Paul O'Connell, and sorry, that's just disappeared off my screen, but I'll come back to it. Thanks, Paul. So Paul's interested in understanding or hearing your views on the importance of the culture of a company that adopts containers and what role it plays in moving to containers. Who'd like to answer that one, Mark?
I can take a stab at that. One of the things, like I mentioned before about OpenShift, is it's trying to, when we talk about things like a public cloud in a box, or when Nikki was talking about Cloud Paks, you know, some people might think, oh, I thought we were just talking about Kubernetes. Kubernetes is just a small part of the platform. There's all this stuff that actually realizes business value that you quickly realize isn't part of Kubernetes. You got to play in a Kubernetes way to kind of leverage the full benefits of the underlying kind of platform. When we talk about containers and the culture for adoption, OpenShift is set up to balance the interests of developers and operators in one kind of Kubernetes offering. And that's a little bit of the culture that you may have heard this buzzword kind of DevOps. So companies that take on this culture of containers, it moves them down this road of DevOps, where you have teams that are self-service, autonomous teams, and they're able to be autonomous because of all the guardrails, if you will, that something like an OpenShift sets up for them, where they can pull down their own Kafka cluster, you know, or stream, as Nikki was saying, but do it in a way that's been preordained and approved and security verified by the operations team. And once you start to see what containers makes possible by way of Kubernetes, you see that organizations start to pick up this DevOps kind of culture. However, nothing kills something like an OpenShift, the value of OpenShift, or even the Cloud Paks faster than ransoming all that behind an IT help desk, which kind of betrays an earlier way of working that was very much waterfall, or ops is over there and I enter a ticket and I wait days for a virtual machine to be spun up. So again, Nikki, Taylor, you may have a different take on that, but I feel like it enables this DevOps, self-service, faster, iterative, autonomous way of working, because OpenShift becomes that traffic cop that balances the interest between development and operations.
Yeah, so maybe I'll just add on to that a little bit, right? It's not just the technology and that influences the culture. I guess it's because it's the demand of the business that ultimately gave birth to a technology like Kubernetes and OpenShift, right? Because if you look at digital transformation and some of the ways people are working today, they're looking at deploying more and more services really, really quickly. I mean, banking, for example, is really competitive, right? Say, oh, this other bank just launched this new product. I want to launch this other new product quicker than them. So there is a huge cycle. There's a really quick cycle of trying to launch new products and services, and the users are getting involved. So you start to see, as Mark alluded to, right? There's small teams of users together with technical people, coming out and deploying new features and functions in a very, very short period of time. You may have heard of this term, agile, scrums, and all that stuff, right? And people are starting to say, hey, this is the way that we want to move today, rather than have a deployment cycle that's 9 months. We want to have a continuous, you heard of the CI/CD, right? Continuous innovation, continuous development, deployment, right? And that's where you see CI/CD come in. People deploying, whether in a month or in 2 weeks, or some would say they do it in every 48 hours, right? Whichever works for your organization, right? But what we're starting to see is that new features and functionality and services are being offered in a shorter period of time, and you want that environment to be agile enough to be able to enable those kind of expectations from the business. And that's where I think OpenShift and Kubernetes came in to say, hey, this is the kind of framework you can use to allow you to meet that demand from the business, right? And so that's the culture of the business that is changing, that is actually driving some of this adoption of some of these new technologies, if that makes sense.
I think so. Have we got any other questions from the audience? All gone quiet? All right. Well, if there are no other questions, I'll wrap it up. Firstly, thank Taylor, Mark, and Nikki for joining today and sharing their expertise. It's been most enlightening. So thank you again. There will be an email sent out by the team from Advent One, just following up and actually offering a proof of technology to you. So please take advantage of that. That's a great opportunity. So if there are no other questions or anything like that, I'll say thank you again for joining. It's been appreciate people's time on a Thursday. It's difficult to get mind share, so yeah, really appreciate everybody who's attended to their time, and thank you again. And I'll let everyone get back to their Thursdays or the balance of their Thursday, and just thank you again, and stay safe, and look forward to seeing you on the other side.
Yes.
Thanks everyone. Have a good weekend ahead.
Thank you.
Cheers. Take care.